In 1958, Australia drowned an entire town on purpose. Adaminaby had stood in the snowy mountains for more than a century. 700 residents, farms, churches, a main street called Denison. All of it was swallowed by a reservoir 9 times the size of Sydney Harbour. For 50 years, nothing surfaced. Then the worst drought in a century pulled the water back to barely 8%, and the streets of a community Australia chose to erase began reappearing from the mud. European settlers first established cattle runs on the cold grass plains of the Eucumbene Valley around 1830. For decades, the remote outpost grew slowly, but the discovery of gold at nearby Kiandra in 1860 brought a sudden influx of miners, service providers, and families. To support this growing population along the mountain road, a formal township was surveyed and proclaimed under the name Seymour on March 25, 1885. To avoid confusion with a town of the same name in Victoria, authorities officially changed the name to Adaminaby on October 9, 1886. Over the next 70 years, Adaminaby grew into a self-sufficient, tight-knit rural hub. At its heart was Denison Street, a commercial spine lined with brick storefronts, general merchants, and hotels like the Traveller's Rest. Rate books and electoral rolls from the mid-20th century suggest a stable community of roughly 700 residents. These families built their lives around enduring local institutions: St. John's Anglican Church, a public school, and a stone post office. This was a place of multi-generational family farms, seasonal agricultural shows, and quiet domestic routines, firmly rooted in the mountain soil long before national industrial plans turned their sights toward the valley. In 1949, the Australian Parliament passed the Snowy Mountains Hydroelectric Power Act, launching an ambitious post-war engineering program. Under Commissioner Sir William Hudson, the newly formed authority planned to divert alpine rivers westward to secure irrigation for the dry Murray-Darling Basin and generate electricity for a growing nation. This decision emerged from intense interstate negotiations, as New South Wales pushed for agricultural water while Victoria demanded power. This grand plan required a giant reservoir, and engineers turned their attention to the Eucumbene Valley. The valley offered a vast catchment area and the high elevation needed to create a massive hydraulic head, the physical height and water pressure needed to spin power turbines. Early designs considered a lower dam that would have spared the town of Adaminaby, but planners rejected this compromise. Official reports concluded that only a higher dam could guarantee the storage capacity required to meet national energy and water targets. Armed with compulsory land acquisition powers, the federal government chose the higher dam configuration, prioritizing national infrastructure gains over the survival of the valley's historic community. The administrative machinery of the Snowy Mountains Authority ground into action in the early 1950s, serving compulsory acquisition notices to property owners. This was not a voluntary departure. Approximately 700 residents faced forced relocation from the valley. While the government offered monetary compensation, official acquisition records show that land valuations frequently clashed with the residents' own estimates of their homes, farms, and ancestral ties. In January 1954, a community referendum presented 3 potential sites for a replacement town. Residents voted for a location on the main highway, 7 kilometers to the northeast, prioritizing a reliable transport link over a lakeside setting. Between 1956 and 1957, the physical relocation began. Workers prepared roads, bridges, and concrete foundations at the replacement site before the heavy hauling commenced. In total, contractors loaded 102 buildings onto flatbed trucks. Houses, shops, and churches were jacked up and driven slowly up the highway, while other civic structures were dismantled or left for demolition. The authority framed New Adaminaby as a modern upgrade, promising electricity and reticulated water. Yet archival files and family testimonies reveal a pervasive sense of powerlessness. Descendants recall ancestors describing the move not as progress, but as an unsettling disruption. While the trucks successfully saved the physical timber and iron of 102 buildings, they could not transport the social geography of the community left behind. In June 1957, the Snowy Mountains Authority closed the diversion gates, and the first waters of the Eucumbene River began spreading across the valley floor. This initial phase of flooding started a full year before the massive earth-fill barrier of the Eucumbene Dam was physically completed in May 1958. Once the finished dam sealed the catchment, the rising waters slowly swallowed the empty streets, remaining foundations, and family farms. What was once a network of mountain roads and generational property lines became the basin of a massive reservoir designed to hold 3,400 gigaliters of water. By volume, this engineered inland sea would store 9 times the capacity of Sydney Harbour. There was no sudden rush of water, only a quiet, relentless rise that slowly erased the old street plan. By the end of 1958, the physical completion of this national engineering project left Old Adaminaby underwater, buried beneath the long-term operating levels of Lake Eucumbene. For nearly 5 decades, Lake Eucumbene kept the remains of Old Adaminaby completely hidden from public view. To the nation, the reservoir was an engineering triumph, but beneath 30 meters of cold water, the valley held a submerged archive of a discarded community. Heritage records confirm the buildings did not survive fully intact, despite local myths of a pristine underwater town. Instead, the lake bed became a quiet sanctuary of fragments, preserving the layout of Denison Street through its silt-covered street alignments and concrete foundations. Over the years, these physical traces remained anchored to the valley floor. Rusted farm machinery lay abandoned in the mud, while the stone steps of St. Mary's Catholic Church and masonry fragments marked where communal life had once gathered. Far below the surface, a rare 19th century water steam boiler rested in the dark, an industrial relic of the valley's early timber economy. While the engineering project succeeded, the actual memory of the town survived only in the private oral histories of displaced families. In 2007, an environmental shift disrupted the engineered balance of the Snowy Mountains. A severe drought, later recorded by the Bureau of Meteorology as the most intense dry spell in a century, gripped the region. Rain ceased, the winter snowpack failed to form, and the rivers feeding the valley shrank to mere trickles. Day by day, the water reserves of Lake Eucumbene evaporated and flowed downstream. Water NSW operational logs confirmed the storage capacity had fallen to a critical 8.7%. As the shoreline retreated, the drying lake bed revealed a forgotten geography. This was not a sudden drainage, but a slow, quiet pulling back of the water. The mud dried and cracked, exposing the lost grid of the valley. First came the faint outlines of old property lines and farm gates. Then, Denison Street, the former commercial spine of the community, rose from the shallows. The road surface remained remarkably solid after 50 years of submersion, solid enough that local fishermen began using the asphalt as an informal ramp to launch their boats. This exposure was far more than a passing curiosity. The returning highway functioned as a physical challenge to the permanence of the 1958 inundation. The climate had forced an environmental reversal, dragging the town's original coordinates out of the dark and back into the light. As the water pulled back, it revealed far more than just the main highway. The drying mud slowly gave way to the concrete foundations of homes and shops, perfectly outlining the blocks where families once lived. Rusted fence posts and abandoned farm machinery rose from the silt, marking the boundaries of the old working valley. On Denison Street, the stone steps of St. Mary's Catholic Church and the footings of St. Joseph's Convent stood clear of the water, a stark physical record of the town's spiritual heart. Nearby, the massive iron shape of a 19th century waterless steam boiler appeared, still heavy and intact after nearly 50 years underwater. Former residents and their descendants walked down the exposed streets, stepping onto ground that had been buried since 1957. For these families, the encounter was not a spectacle of ruins, but a quiet walk through their own history. The returned town sparked a complicated mix of emotions, a quiet pride in the community that once was, shadowed by the lingering grief of its forced sacrifice. But this exposure also brought immediate danger. As word of the exposed ruins spread, souvenir hunters and looters arrived, threatening to strip away the remaining bricks and relics, and subjecting the town to a second, piece-by-piece loss. To halt the stripping of the ruins, the New South Wales government stepped in. In June 2007, the Minister for Planning issued Interim Heritage Order No. 108 under the Heritage Act 1977, outlawing any unauthorised excavation or removal of relics from the lakebed. This protection became permanent on June 3, 2008, when the site was formally listed on the New South Wales State Heritage Register under item ID 5060670. Though Snowy Hydro Limited owns the land, the law redefined the exposed valley as a managed heritage landscape, rather than an open-air attraction. This legal shield protects the physical evidence of a displaced community, but it cannot resurrect the social life that once animated the valley. The surviving foundations are a silent monument, not a restored town. They stand as a physical record of the unresolved tension between a celebrated national achievement and its local sacrifice. Today, the water has returned, once again concealing the roads and stone steps. As Lake Eucumbene rises and falls, the survival of Adaminaby's memory no longer relies on the volatility of the climate, but on the strength of its protection. Today, the water has once again reclaimed Old Adaminaby. Yet, as climate volatility increases, these ruins will inevitably resurface. They remain a silent reminder that progress always demands a sacrifice, one the water cannot hide forever. Share your thoughts on this lost community in the comments below.